All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And Andrea is going to be sharing the screen today with us, and a few little activities for you to do as we work through the presentation. But this is a topic that the principals highly recommended when we gave them a list of PDs that we were considering offering. This was one that they came up with on their own as something that they thought that would be valuable to their staff. So we started working on what that could look like. And so what you see in front of you is what you've experienced today will be kind of our interpretation of this. All right. And then so I'm gonna let Andrea do a little introduction of the next few slides.
Okay, so we just really want to preface all of this by saying this is a new experience for all of us. So we're not coming to you all as experts on virtual learning, but with working with everyone, we're going to take kind of those best practices and try and apply that to a new situation. So by using our past experience and risk taking and then reflection on that risk taking, our goal is to really maximize our students' learning by growing our current practice and our current situation. So that being said, let's start out with a little hook, and I want to see if you all can determine who done it. Oh, goodness. There we go.
All right, we're not hearing the.
Andrea, can you turn it up?
We heard it earlier.
Or maybe take off your headphones so it goes through your speaker.
We'll try.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Okay, if you can go ahead and type in the chat, who do you think did it? Okay, so I'm going to fast forward to where they tell us, because when I clicked off of it, it didn't pause. It took me to the next slide.
In the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Okay, so I did this with my students at the beginning of the year, and they always like to go back and see what changes they could actually see take place. So there's 21 changes. So try and keep track and see how many you see live. It's hard to pay attention to. They always told me they saw all 21, but we'll see how many we can find out.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam.
Okay, so how does this relate to good online learning? One, this is kind of a hook for you, and we'll get to that part shortly. But going back to brain-based research, the brain pays attention to what we prime it to pay attention to. So at the beginning of the video, we were saying who done it, and you were trying to figure out from this very short clip who was the murderer, right? But then when we ask you to look for something different, your brain pays attention to those different things. So if we don't line our traditional instruction to how the brain works, students aren't going to learn, and the same is going to be said for that online learning as well. So we might be teaching in that online platform, but is learning actually happening? I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Chad.
Chad, you're on mute, I think.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. One of the books that has been instrumental in our equity work around the district is Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And so when we started thinking about this work, we wanted to align it with her work of brain-based learning, but also be mindful of the cultural aspects that are important. And in her book, she identifies 3 stages of information processing that are common for all learning to happen in the brain. Okay, they start with input. The brain is paying attention to our senses, and all of them are offering information about the world around us in them. And then we choose some information from that. So, for example, in that video, if we were focusing on the changes or focusing on who did it, that input is what our brain is mostly paying attention to. And then it sends it into an elaboration stage where we try to make sense of that information. We either try to attach it to something we already have or build up some new circuitry there and start to move it from working memory into the long-term memory. And then finally, we strengthen those connections and everything through application of that information. And so if we could be mindful that even in a virtual learning, that our brain is trying to go through those 3 stages during online learning or face-to-face learning or anything, then we can make sure that, again, learning is happening and not just teaching. And so in her book, she offers 4 strategies that you can move you through those stages. And so the first one is ignite, then it goes to chunk, chew, and review. And so we're going to go through each one of those with you at this time. Steve?
Okay, so one portion of that is sort of that pre-assessment, and we want to see where you all stand right now in regards to online learning. So I'm trying a new tool today, so have some patience. I'm modeling risk-taking here. At the top of your Zoom screen, if you hover your mouse over the top, that box should drop down, and there should be an option to annotate.
And if it's not at the top, it might be at the bottom.
Or it could be at the bottom. But if you hover over so you get the options, where you mute or stop your video, go to annotate, and there is an option to stamp. So go ahead and choose the stamp option and choose whatever stamp you want, but then we're just gonna choose a emoji to put our stamp next to. So I put mine above the smiley face.
What are they stamping, Andrea?
I put my stamp, you're just stamping the emoji, thank you. You're stamping the emoji about your current feelings about online learning. Current feelings about online learning. Laura Barber, the button is near, if you see mute and stop video, it's to the right of that for annotate. Camille, I like that you put multiple. We all get excited about stamps. Okay, so we just, pre-assessment is part of this, right? You want to know where your students are, but this is kind of a fun way to check in with your students and get that participation. So we wanted to model that as well. Okay, so moving on, Steve is going to talk to us more about that first chunk that we mentioned called Ignite.
So the first chunk that that Hammond talks about in her book is the ignite stage. And igniting is what we're really going to be doing at the beginning of any lesson, whether it's online, offline, or I'm sorry, in a traditional classroom setting or really wherever. And what you're really doing is you're trying to get students to flip the switches in their mind that they need to have on in order to grasp the lesson. So what we're doing is we're really priming the mind to absorb what we're going to be talking about and getting them to focus their mind in the right direction. The video that we showed earlier was a very, very good example of what not to do. We had them focusing really, really well on, the video had you all focusing really, really well on the wrong thing. So as a result, you know, all of us were, at least I was when I first saw this video, I was really focused on trying to figure out who had done it. I had flipped the switch in my brain that says, okay, I need to be looking to figure out what are the clues, where were these people at, what was my timeline, kind of all of those detective words, all those kind of elements of being a detective. What I wasn't looking for was what was changing around in the background of our setting. Had I been primed for that, it would have been a very different experience. So really what those switches are is the RAS, or this regular, Chad, am I pronouncing that correct? Can you do
Reticular activating system, the RAS, yes.
the reticular activating system. And what we're doing is, again, we're trying to cue the brain to pay attention, but more importantly, to pay attention to the correct thing. Really, this is a good time to kind of bridge your students' previously held knowledge in with kind of where we're heading to. You can do it through a lot of different ways. The hows on this, I think, are probably more applicable to the elementary school students. I don't think that I could necessarily do drumming or chanting in my class at North Central. I think I would get very odd looks from my juniors. However, I've used things like picture books. A lot of times our bell ringers can do a little bit of this sort of thing, but really we're trying to get them to clue into what they're looking for. What I would like everyone to do right now is, if you could, in the chat, most of us have done this already, we just maybe didn't know that that was what was called in this particular context. So if everyone wants to write down something in the chat as to what they have done to kind of ignite their students at the beginning of a lesson, that would be great.
lots of really good examples coming through.
And I love those videos and the rep because they're multimedia. And as much as I could never get away doing a drum or a chant in my class, I could definitely use rap for sure. Connecting music to a real life event, that's a great one. Yeah, people have really good ones. Songs. TikTok. Very good. Yeah, these are some great ones. These are some very, very good ones. Yeah, those are all going to be very, very good things to do. Quizlet Lives. Very good. Very good. If we go on to our next one, I think a lot of people, and you guys are really, from what I'm seeing in the group chats, do you mind going on the next slide, Andrea? Unless I missed something, Chad or Andrea, that you guys wanted to add in? Okay. A couple of things that you guys can use. I tend to use a lot of current events, for this. So I'll use a lot of articles. I'll use a lot of CNN 10. A lot of times if you find things, a lot of times if you can find things online, articles that you're interested in about what's going on, those are all things that really work well for this sort of thing. One that works very, very well that I wanted to point out was the first bullet point on here. The excuse me, the New York Times has a feature, it's almost every day or every weekday, where literally they just put up a picture with no caption. So you don't really know what it is. You're not entirely sure. And those are a great one to start off with, especially for a bell ringer. You can put that up and say, hey, what's going on in this picture? What are you seeing in this picture, and have them add captions to it. That's a great one. CNN 10 is a good one. That's just a quick kind of 5 to 10 minute little hit of the news. And so you can kind of utilize that as well. So yeah. Any questions? Anyone want to chime in with questions, either verbally or on the chat?
Autumn asked if we will have access to the slide, and Chad said yes, and a recording, and that will be in the coach's newsletter.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The igniting, should it have to do with the lesson?
It should be kind of heading in the direction of what you're trying to kind of work with would be the best suggestion. Because if you're asking the wrong question initially, kind of like the who done it versus what's going to change, you can actually send your kids in the wrong direction. Then you're kind of starting over for the day would be my thought on it.
I guess the reason I'm asking that is because, if you're like, I'm trying to figure out how maybe CNN 10 would go in with my reading class or something, you know what I mean? And so I wasn't sure. And are we talking about just lessons, or are we talking about Zooming? So like igniting them in a Zoom or igniting them in a lesson. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can comment a little more on that. So if you think of it from the conceptual level, that might help. So the CNN 10 might have the perfect thing in there to help you connect to at the conceptual level to what it is you're trying to get through. Perhaps you're doing an argumentative piece in your language and literature class, and so there is a poll or this pro con type thing going on or such on CNN 10 or anything like that where they're arguing from one side to the other, and and just kind of getting that initial concept going. Okay, so if you were talking about the coronavirus and such, perhaps in your Zoom even, but in a lesson, you might want to frame that around what's it like for living in isolation, or what's it like to live in fear, or what's something that kind of like that snowball effect when it gets started, it just grows and grows and grows or something. There's a bigger concept that's kind of bringing it all together there. Mm-hmm. Does that help, Leah?
Yeah, I mean, I've always known that your do now should go with your lesson, right? But I just, with e-learning and 8th graders, just trying to get them on has been such a difficult task. Mm-hmm. That like I did a Kahoot of how well do you know Miss Floyd, just to kind of interest
Mhm.
them to even get on, which had nothing to do with my lesson, you know? So I guess that's where my struggle piece is.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's fine. But but again, perhaps that's not really part of your lesson. The get to know. But then you can pull out. What is the connecting piece after that?
Yeah,
Hey, hey,
yeah.
Chad, can I
Yeah,
jump in here real quick?
yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that a lot of times this Ignite component can be one of those things that draws students to your actual online lesson. I mean, I've certainly in my classes had trouble getting kids to do the lesson or to log on, but allowing them, if you're using things like New York Times or CNN 10, and you can loop your lesson into what their experience is right now, and taking their experience, saying now we're going to put into a little bit of a broader context within the lesson of what we're doing, that's going to draw them in and probably encourage them, hopefully, to come on more. You know, I think it's making it relevant to them, which is good.
Thank you.
Good question.
All right, Andrea.
okay. All right. So the second part after Ignite is the chunk. And the chunk is really just about making the information digestible to students. So it should be the right sized amount. So keeping in mind that the working memory holds 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. And so that's why things like your phone number, they're 7 digits long, and your social security number is 8 digits long, because your working memory can easily process those tiny bits of information. And that being said, keeping in mind with what information you're presenting, make sure that you do some sort of pre-assessment so that you know where your kids are. And then from there, you're building off that prior knowledge. This portion can be teacher fed or it can be student led. So I'm thinking in terms of my lesson, how am I presenting this information, right? Like when you typically think of teaching or lecturing, like how am I presenting this information? And that could be teacher led or student led. So if we look at the how or the strategies, we've listed quite a few here. So they could read or listen or view a video. Students could go through a student-led web quest. They could do jigsaws or reciprocal teachings. If you used a mnemonic or an acronym or an abbreviation, that would also be a way to help chunk this information for your students. Okay, so some virtual resources for chunking. Well, Google Hangout or Zoom, so you could do those live lessons, or if you want to record yourself, Screencastify and QuickTime are 2 of those examples. And we're not going to go through those because I think you guys have been inundated. But if you have questions about those, make sure you ask. The Edpuzzle, Khan Academy, Nearpod, and Blend Space, I've seen these used in quite a few different contexts, but they're a way to present information maybe without having to record yourself. That took me a long time to get comfortable with, and I can't tell you how many times I have to re-record myself. So sometimes it's nicer if you have a resource that's already available to you. Things like Edpuzzle and Nearpod give you the functionality to know who has actually watched the video, and it allows students to respond to content while they are going through that chunk phase. So that being said, can you take a minute and just reflect on what we've done so far? And we're going to use the chat. So we're just reflecting on the Ignite and the chunking using one of these sentence starters. Okay. I know some people are probably finishing up, but thank you so much for taking some of these sentence starters. And this is an easy way to engage with your students because sometimes they're very silent on the response and you know that they always have lots to say. So this can give you a way for them to respond just like we would in a traditional classroom. Okay, so Chad is going to talk to us about the chew.
All right. So the chew is oftentimes really one of the most important pieces. Again, building off of what we learned from the chunk, that the brain can only hold on to about 5 to 9 pieces of information at a time. We need to then give the brain the time to process this information. And so in the process is moving it out of the working memory and moving it towards the long-term memory piece. This is one of those reasons why we say, that when middle schoolers are in math class, they need to know their math facts. Okay, they need to know those to memory by that point so that they can free up the working memory for the cognitive load that comes in processing information and such. So when we chunk things into that 5 to 9 pieces of information, and then we give them time, it might be in an unstructured way, might just be turn and talk to your neighbor about one of the things that stood out the most, or what do you, or to summarize what was just said in the previous lecture part. But it's a time to just get a little processing and move that out of that working memory. The other key piece here is to start to thinking about what are some cognitive routines that the students can start to own. Okay, so how can they start to own this chewing process through visible thinking routines and such that perhaps like a concept map of some sort that they are just going to automatically start pulling out as they go through learning, and not only are they getting better and learning more content, but they're also learning more about these processes as we go. And so the visible thinking routines, such as making thinking visible, graphic organizers, all these things are very helpful for kids to start for that transfer to happen from the working memory to that long-term memory. And when we look at this, I want you to take a second right now and think about I love the ideas of the metaphors and analogies. What is a metaphor or a simile or an analogy for the 3 parts that we have just already talked about: the ignite, the chunk, the chew. I'll give you an example to start with. When I think of the ignite, the chunk, the chew, I think of a birthday. Okay, that here's the birthday cake coming. We light the candles and we sing happy birthday. That's part of the ignite. Oh, I'm focusing in there. And then I chunk the information by cutting the cake into the right size pieces for everyone to be served. And then the chew is where we actually get to taste it, smell it. We get to engage with the cake to make sense of, is this again, is it my favorite flavor? Is it fresh cake or not? All those different things are happening as I start chewing. So my birthday cakes is my simile metaphor. If you would take a moment right now and go into the chat and perhaps put a metaphor for the ignite, chunk, chew process that we're recommending for learning here. Laura, I think you're okay. I think, seeing the elephant and, or smelling the elephant as it's cooking and then cutting it in one bite at a time is part of that's the, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. That's the chunk piece. And then chewing is sitting around with your friends or whatever. Ooh, I love the vacation example and the driving. Nice. Great job, guys. All right, so let's take a moment and look at some online resources that we think are great for this chewing section. Andrea. All right, and so what I really want to highlight to you is, the importance of taking advantage of what Canvas has to offer. The discussions aspect of Canvas is a great vehicle for this. So perhaps timing, you give them a chunk of information to take in, and then they go to the discussion, and they now have some sentence starters or questions in there that are going to get them engaged with the initial conversation. Then after they go in there and perhaps they share their response and maybe reply to a couple others, then they can come back and take the next the next chunk of information in as they go through. The other piece would be Flipgrid. I love using Flipgrid to have students, give me an audio of what they've learned. It could summarize, could synthesize, all kinds of things going on there for them to again process that information from that latest chunk. Okay, and one of the key things to remember is with these two aspects, or the chunk and the chew, are something that's probably going to be ongoing. Okay, so it's very possible in a lesson that you would ignite, chunk, chew, whatever it takes there to get that digestible amount of learning, of knowledge or whatever, and then the actual consolidation of it through the chew process, and to make sure it's not just taught, but it is learned at the same time. All right, and let's go to the final section, and this is the review section. Okay, and this is where we start to consolidate all of our neural pathways. We, if without the review, we would discard weaker neural pathways. And so the idea here is to use it or lose it. Okay, if I want them to remember something, then I have to give them a chance to use that, to apply it within those first 24 hours. Okay, and then if I move on and then I want to do it again, I want to do some timed intervals of practice, of retrieval for this information. So if you can imagine, it's like when many of us were going through college and stuff, and we were cramming for tests and such like that, and we had our little index cards, and on one side we had one of our vocabulary words or such, and then on the other side we had what that means, and we filled up every single section of that card, and we would just look at the word and we turn it over and read the other side. But the new brain science says that the idea is to get ourselves to retrieve that from that long-term memory. The more that we can bring that back up into the working memory and use it back and forth, and like that, is strengthening that neural pathway. Okay, and just making sure that it is a stronger learning, the deeper understanding and such. So if I would take that flashcard and I would just try to remember everything I can about that word, instead of just flipping it over and reading, then I'm getting to the point of retrieving that information. And so that repetition is important. And then when you think about this over the chunk of a unit or such, the importance of spiral review comes into play here. We've got to be thinking about how we are circling back to these problems. All right, let's go to the next slide. And so when we look at these resources here for reviewing, a lot of my Kahoot or Google Form might give me just the piece to remember some of those things, some of that retrieval practice, and then we could then perhaps throw in a bigger explanation. daily language review, Susie is mentioning there in the chat. And yes, that would be a great way to bring in that spiral review of the concepts. You know, when we get students on some of the IXL and different programs that we have, again, the spiral nature of that for the reviewing is happening and helping to make some of that those connections stronger as we go. Okay, now I want to look at this next slide and this graphic, and we really like what it's going to show about the process of learning and forgetting. Okay, so if you can imagine, you know, you're sitting and if you've got this right-sized chunk and you've digested it, you know, and then you have a chance within that first 10 minutes, okay, as soon as you start to move on from that information, the brain starts to forget. And then as soon as you have a chance to revisit it, okay, through some kind of review, some repetition, maybe it's a link by the teacher to the new concepts, and then some chances to practice that again within 24 hours. And then again, this shows like over 7 days and 31 days and 3 months and such. The key thing here is that when I look at this, I think of the coronavirus charts that we see. They talk about flattening the curve. Okay, notice that curve in those first few days. If we don't do something with it and keep at it, that curve really goes steeply. But over time, if we keep revisiting those things through the review process, that curve starts to flatten, just like we're hopeful with our coronavirus graphs and such. And so the idea here is to flatten that curve of forgetting by offering more opportunities for repetition and review happening in our classrooms. All right. So the next slide is where we start to bring all this back together. And here, this is just a summary of, you know, the four lesson elements. You know, kind of what does that look like? Here are some tools that you can use that we shared on the other screens and such. And hopefully, as a result of this training today and everything, it gives you a good framework that is fairly easy to use and that will start to see some successes and not you know, not have to worry so much about any drop off of thinking. All right. So. All right, I'm gonna let Andrea revisit our emoji chart here with you.
I was muted, sorry. Let's go ahead and do the same thing we did earlier and reflect on our feelings about virtual or online learning. So remember, we go right where you would mute or stop your video, go over to annotate, choose a stamp, go for it, y'all. Earlier in the chat, it was asked if we could, first off, under annotate, I have the availability to clear all of these votes off. And also under more, you can disable attendee annotation. So like, let's say you ask your kids to do this. We can imagine that they would want to do this for like the next 25 minutes of their lives. But you can turn that off so they're not able to do that. Some of the other options under annotate, you can spotlight something or draw or type text. So I think those are nice features as well. Okay, this is kind of the end of our presentation. I'd like to, Nancy's asking me to share how to annotate again. So Nancy, at the bottom of your screen where you have the option to mute and stop video, if you keep going over to the right, there is an option to annotate, and then you choose stamp from there. Autumn asked, can you see which student posted a stamp? I don't think so. Anybody know anything about that? Oh wait, show names of annotators. Okay, so I can see that Nancy drew that circle. Can somebody else try and do a stamp? Braylon, yep, it's live. It's happening live, so it is quick. I saw that Laura just put a heart. Steve did a check mark. So under more, you can show the names of, I'm sorry guys, it keeps clicking back. You can show the names of annotators, and now it won't let me click back. There we go. Laura, if you are under mute, stop video, and you go all the way over to the right where it says more, those 3 dots. Do you see that? I have it, I don't know. And then I have an option for chat, record. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's only for the host.
Hosting, yeah.
It could be, yeah. That's a possibility. It would definitely be something to try with your kids. And like going into this, I had tried it with Steve and Chad, and that was it. And I was like, all right, we'll just see how it goes. So.
Right.
Well, Andrea, since we don't have it on our screen, could you tell us, you probably said it before, is it at the bottom or is it at the top of the screen?
So it's wherever your bar is for mute, stop video, wherever that is, there's also an option for more for me. And then there's a list. It looks like Laura was able to share a screen.
I had to go at the top where it says you are viewing Andrea McCoy's screen, where it says view options. If I click on that, then it says annotate.
That's where mine was too, Nancy, at the very top.
So mine says annotate there, and that's when you can go, that's where you can choose like the stamp. I even did text and typed my name on there, but I can see what other people have put. If they stamped it, I don't know who stamped it unless they actually do it right now. But if you have them like write their name next to the emoji, you should be able to see where I wrote my name, McDowell. I see like Laura Swain has an arrow, so you could even have them do that.
Awesome. And if you guys ever want to try something like this and you want to try it out with a guinea pig, don't be afraid to reach out to your coaches and say, hey, can you Zoom with me for a couple minutes? And we'd be happy to do that. We can try it out and see that usability too. So before we leave, do you guys have any other questions about this function, which I'm learning about, or any of the content presented? Okay, well, thank you so much. And if you do have a question, throw it in the chat or go ahead and take yourself off mute, and have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone coming out tonight.
Thank you.
So much.
Coaches, if you want to stay on for a second.
Whoever's recording can stop recording.